in coffee farms especially, because it's, you have all this leftover product and it turns it back into dirt that has a lot of nutrients in it, so it works really well.
Who was not at the last session on Friday? Just two of you? Okay, so it's going to be a new thing whenever we have guest speakers come into our seminars or for whatever reason, but we have this thing called 1 million cups. I don't think anybody has probably ever been to this before. But whenever somebody comes up to speak at 1 million cups, which is where they share their ideas in the community, we want them to feel welcomed and part of that mix. So Brian is here with us today to share his story about his company, but we got to make him feel welcome before he starts that story. So everybody needs to, and remember we're in a bank, so keep it like kind of under control. But we need to make him feel welcome, so if everybody could give Brian a round of applause and make him feel welcome. All right. Thank you for coming.
Yeah,
I'll let you
do
have
the
floor.
golf clap.
The banker's clap.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for having me here, and thanks Mark for reaching out to me, and hello everybody who watches me later on this video recording. My name is Brian, and CEO is not really a title I use, but I am the founder and I'm the majority owner of Ross Street Roasting Company. And Ross Street Roasting Company is based out of Tama, Iowa, which is an hour west on Highway 30 from Cedar Rapids. I live in Toledo, Iowa, and Tama and Toledo are two small towns that are right next to each other. They're basically one community and two separate towns. And Ross Street is a street in Toledo, and that is where I started roasting coffee 4 years ago in my garage, which is on Ross Street. So the name of my business is the proverbial, American dream that started in a garage story. So many awesome companies like Apple have started in garages. So I thought I'd just continue that tradition and incorporate it in the name. And I have an English undergraduate degree, so I like alliteration. So Ross Street Roasting has kind of a nice little sing-songy ring to it. So I started roasting as a hobbyist 4 years ago, and the first time I ever roasted coffee, I used a popcorn popper, and that was my coffee roaster. And that's really how easy it is to get into roasting coffee. Even in little Tama, Toledo, I was able to just drive to Shopco and buy a little $20 popcorn popper, and I ordered some unroasted coffee, which is green. I ordered that off the internet from one of my friends out in Virginia who got me into this whole coffee roasting thing. And so he sent me like a little pound bag of unroasted coffee. And in December of 2013, I started roasting for family and friends to make Christmas gifts. I thought, well, this would be fun, do this little thing, make some Christmas gifts for people. And so I was tasting that coffee, and my friends were tasting that coffee, and family who got it for Christmas gifts. And one, I loved it. I really enjoyed the roasting part of it. I had been drinking coffee since my early 20s, and I started roasting when I was like 35. So the move into roasting felt pretty natural, and I loved it. And I started learning more and more about coffee. Like, I didn't know coffee was a cherry that grew on a tree, and that the beans aren't beans, they're seeds from that cherry. So that was all pretty new to me. I started to get really excited about tasting coffees from different countries and noticing the differences between them, even if I roasted them the exact same way, which on a popcorn popper you could really only roast one way. It's like flip it on, flip it off. But I'd throw different coffees from different countries in there, and then I'd taste them, and I was just amazed at the differences in flavors that coffees have. So it just became this kind of like nerdy obsession / hobby that I immediately fell in love with. I burned the motor out in my popcorn popper in about a month. So I bought a $40 used bread machine from a lady in Ankeny off of Craigslist, and then a $20 heat gun from Menards or something. And for a year and a half, I used this bread machine and a heat gun to roast coffee. So that was another little DIY setup. And probably about a year or so into it, I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up. I had graduated with 2 master's degrees in 2012 in Virginia, and we moved back to our home state of Iowa. My wife found a job as a mental health care worker in Tama, Toledo, which is where she grew up. That's why we moved back there, so we could be close to family. I'm also originally from Iowa. But I had 2 master's degrees, and I lived in a very small town where I had 0 job options for somebody like me with that kind of education. I tried some work in a church setting, and that wasn't really going so well. So I did have work as basically a trainer of teachers teaching online for the school that I had gone to in Virginia. So like I was able to do that at home. So I was a telecommuter, sitting in my office on my computer, working with these teachers back in Virginia to train them to teach online. I used to be an IT guy, and then I went to grad school, so those 2 things kind of gave me an easy job after we moved back from grad school. But I knew I didn't want to sit in my office by myself in my house 8 hours a day for the rest of my working life. And then the church stuff wasn't working out, and then this coffee stuff started, and I just fell in love with it. So I started kind of shifting things around with my priorities and planning and stuff like that, and was able to start Raw Street Roasting as an actual business in 2015. So just shy of 3 years ago is when we started. So that's kind of how it all got started, and I'll just kind of pause there if anybody has any questions or comments before I talk about what's happened since we started the business.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What was like the hardest part in like starting?
Probably convincing my wife that it was a good idea. I am my entire adolescent, young adult, and now middle adult life, I have a really unstoppable creative drive. Like I just always want to be doing something new and interesting, and it's manifested itself in different ways over the years. I used to be into music, writing and recording music, working with some of my friends on stuff like that. So that used to be what I did to kind of express my creativity. And then when this got going, like that's where that really went to. And the thing that made my wife nervous was, you've never done this before. You've also tried to start other crazy things in the past, and you haven't followed through on them, and we still need to pay the bills. So this coffee roasting thing sounds crazy. So that, I would say that was probably the hardest part, was to, like I knew within myself that like, this is it. Like I have found where I want to stay, because I kind of jumped around 3 different industries in my working adult life and wasn't really satisfied in any of them. And what I found in coffee was something, even if it's not roasting and owning this business forever, like I could see myself just moving to a different coffee company and doing other things in the coffee industry, because it's a large industry. Coffee is huge, and it's a global market, and a lot of people drink coffee. So there's a lot of places you can go in the industry, and most of the things that I've discovered about the industry are interesting, fun, and the people that work in specialty coffee are really typically pretty awesome human beings. So the types of people that I really like working with. So that's, I settled within myself that, okay, this is what I want to do. Now I just have to kind of take it from this, burning passion and joy and desire to, grow something and start making it a reality. So that was pretty difficult.
What about capital?
Yeah, money.
Yeah.
Where'd the money come from? Yeah, like I said, when I worked in IT in my 20s, like when I left the IT industry, I was making like $80,000 a year as a 28-year-old. That was pretty awesome. Like I could stay on that trajectory, and if I had, I'd probably be, doing pretty darn well right now. So when I went to grad school, my income just went through the floor. And we were poor grad students for 4 years. We had to finance our graduate school. My wife and I both went to grad school. So I got 2 degrees, she got 1. So we had $80,000 worth of student loan debts to worry about. And so when I started this coffee thing, like that was 3 years after we just finished grad school. So we had like no money. And we're just starting to pay back on our bills. We got a house, a mortgage payment, and all that stuff. So I had this crazy idea, but no money to like throw at it. So I had to find an investor, and I was lucky enough to find. It was a friend family connection. It was a guy I went to school with. His family. They're cattle ranchers in Kansas, and they're a family farm, but they're a lot for a family farm. They're a small corporate family farm, so it's a pretty big operation for it being run by just 3 guys, and so they have more money than I do. And so my friend caught wind of this, that I was looking for investors and writing a business plan, and he said, "Hey, you might be getting a call from my brother. We might be interested in investing in this Ross Street roasting idea." And it didn't really take long for me to pitch the vision. I showed him the crappy business plan that I wrote because I'd never done that before, and had a couple phone conversations with them. They talked about it as a within their business meetings. And then, they sent me $15,000 to start the business. So that was the process of finding capital. It allowed us to immediately buy an actual commercial coffee roaster, so I could stop using the bread machine heat gun. So we bought that. That was basically the first thing I wrote a check for. And then we found a place to put the machine and get up and running. And by the end of 2015, we were in a temporary space. We were licensed by the state to operate, and then I was able to actually start selling coffee to customers. So it wasn't too hard to find money, but the thing about growing a business is the money thing never ends. Like, if you want to grow a business, you need to raise more money, and we were able to kind of, we could go for a couple months, but we're still new and we weren't making any money yet. So it's like, well, crap, I'm running out of money. Now what do I do? So it's just like a constant game of trying to figure out where you're going to get capital to keep things running, but then also to keep growing the business. And I'd never had to worry about that before, other than operating, like helping manage our personal finances as a family, which my wife and I do fairly well as a team. That was the end of it. Like I'd never had to worry about money in a business. So that's been nonstop learning, and I'm still learning about that. So the money game it's tricky.
Did you put a lot of your own money in?
No, I haven't, and that's been nice. That was another thing that kind of helped convince my wife. It's like, all right, I'm going to obviously invest a whole bunch of my own time because I'm the only person who's actively doing most of the things in the business. But we don't have to throw we don't have to throw our own money into this thing. We're in a situation now where I might have to, but I haven't had to yet. So basically the only thing I've paid for is my own time, and then sacrificing the income that I otherwise would have been making, because I'm still making less than half per year than I made when I was 28 years old. Like I haven't, and I'm going to be 39 on Thursday. So it's like, it's been 9 years of not making nearly as much money as I used to, and I'm still only about halfway back to recovering it. So I've sacrificed a lot of my own potential income as well, which that has value.
That's super interesting.
So that's the businessy side. We talked a little bit about the coffee side before we got the camera rolling, before everybody was in. And I mentioned a little bit about this. Coffee is an amazing beverage, and as an agricultural product, it's an amazing thing. From a food science perspective, coffee has more flavor complexity than wine. Wine is typically thought of as something that is, there's different grapes, there's different places they're grown, and it all tastes different. And there are people who stake their entire profession on being able to professionally taste wine and being able to like pick apart the components of flavor in wines. And food science research has shown that coffee is yet more complex than even wine is. So even from just kind of, if you have any sort of interest in the way things taste, I have always been a pretty sensory-driven person. I smell everything that I eat, like, or drink. And I did that even before I got into coffee, and my wife would make fun of me. Like, I just have to smell everything. So, you know, I get some food and like, you know, I get something to drink and I like sniffing it. And so I was already kind of predisposed to find interest in the diversity that there is within coffee, flavors and aromas and stuff like that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I want to know, in your opinion, what's the best like way to have coffee?
It's not, a lot of it is derived both on personal preference. What floats your boat does matter. Like, if you like espresso, you can spend years chasing the espresso unicorn and like never catch it. Because espresso machines are expensive, grinders are expensive, there's all sorts of different ways you can make espresso drinks. So that's like, espresso is like one kind of coffee drink that you can nerd out on for years and never get to the bottom of. And I'm a relative, like I'm somewhat new to espresso. When I started drinking coffee, it was brewing coffee at home, and I started with just like a crappy countertop coffee brewer. And then I used that for a while, and then my wife, when I was like in my mid-20s, she got me a French press, and then got me whole bean coffee with a coffee grinder, so like I had to work harder to like make my cup of coffee in the morning, but I was like, wow, this tastes better. Isn't that interesting? And then started trying different coffees. And so really it's a matter of like what you find interesting and where you want to, you know, kind of go with it. So there are better and worse ways to do coffee at home. There are better and worse ways to do espresso. There's a lot of crappy espresso out there. Bohemia, my business partners, which I didn't get into that part of the story yet, but Bohemia in Nubo has our coffee. They use Ross Street, and then they also use Kickapoo Coffee Roasters out of Wisconsin. Both very good roasters, and Bohemia is a very good coffee shop. And so they do espresso really well. But, you know, there'd be plenty of other cafes, even right here in Cedar Rapids, where, like, I could walk in and look at their espresso setup and go, don't want to taste it. So, yeah, it really depends on a whole bunch of variables. And I usually avoid the word best or worst, because it's like, well, what are you after?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you drink coffee?
Not really, but
Yeah.
like, I mean, I do, but like, not, like, it's occasional.
Yeah.
It's not like I drink it every single day.
Right.
The only experience I have with coffee is making it at work, and but my parents forced me to clean up the Keurig because our water was so hard here.
Yeah, yep. Yeah.
Have you gotten into the Keurig business or not really?
No, I have some pretty fundamental problems with the model of Keurig.
As do I.
Yeah, the waste involved in the product is astronomical.
Yes.
It's created mountains and mountains and mountains of plastic waste that will like never be dealt with. So that I find really, really offensive. It's also pre-ground and pre-packaged, and you have no idea when that coffee was roasted. You have no idea how long it's been sitting in that little K-cup. And part of my business model is high-end specialty coffees that are fresh roasted to order. And so if I were to go that route, even if Keurig came up with an environmentally sustainable model for their product packaging, I would still have problems with the fact that I'm taking really good coffee, grinding it up and sticking it in a cup that may sit in a box for months before somebody even puts it in a machine. And coffee does degrade in terms of its flavor quality over time. So for like small micro roasters like me, the window you usually operate with for a fresh roast is anything that's been roasted within the last 2 weeks. Only small micro roasters like me put roast dates on their bags. Like if you go to Hy-Vee and pick up a bag of Starbucks or a can of Folgers, like there's no date on it. You have no idea when it was produced.
Because it'd probably be too old anyway.
Yeah, right,
So not
yeah.
put it on.
So that's the
People
other, like freshness would be my second problem. And then they're really expensive. Like you pay for convenience. People think it's like, oh, this is, it's quick and easy and fun, but if you break down the price per pound of what you're buying with Keurig, it's crazy expensive, and you're getting really old stale coffee. And I have a hunch that the Keurig wave started when I was about 28 is when I saw my first Keurig machine. And they came on fast and strong. They got really popular really fast. Now you see them everywhere, but I think the market is starting to realize that, like, oh wait, these problems with Keurig aren't worth the price that we're paying for it, and I think they're on their way out. Yeah,
I agree.
I mean, they'll never go away. And
It's just too convenient.
yeah, but I think the initial success they have, they're already starting to tail off, and then they'll just kind of have this slow residual sales over time. So
You think they'll become like a niche?
I mean, it's commodity coffee, so they're just trying to appeal to the greatest number of people they possibly can. So they actually probably will still continue to make a whole bunch of money and sell a whole bunch of product, but I don't think it'll be at the level that they initially enjoyed.
Not like
product
one in
was
every
released.
single home or
Right.
something like that.
Right,
Alright.
yeah. It's my opinion.
Alright.
I could be wrong.
Interesting, I didn't know anything about that. I
Yeah.
never really thought about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I refuse to drink out of a Keurig.
yeah.
I see them in hotels and stuff, and it's like, no, not wasting my time.
Yeah, and when people come to me and say, "Ooh, I'm interested in your product. Do you have K-cups?" I say no, but they make the little basket that you can put other people's coffee in and put it in the Keurig, and that's how I got my parents drinking my coffee when I started. Like they still had a Keurig at that point, so they went completely off the K-cups and they only used the basket. But then my dad broke the pump on the machine because he was packing the basket too tight, and it wore the pump out because it had to work too hard, and so it just failed. So when his Keurig died, I'm like, don't get another one. Like, let's get you another machine that.
These pumps are so weak, and
Yeah.
the internals of those things are terrible.
Right.
I've had to break them apart a couple times and try to they just so bad.
Yeah. Yep. And like a lot of consumer appliances for household use, they're cheaply manufactured and they're actually designed to break after a while, so you have to keep buying
Apple.
Keurig's new
We're on our third
thing. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, same here.
So,
That's so.
Our water's so hard that it just breaks
You
it.
have to put in the stuff.
Yeah.
I don't do that. I don't take much to do that.
So it might be helpful since Bohemia is a Cedar Rapids connection, and I know you said you've had coffee at Bohemia. Who's been to Bohemia? Good percentage of you. So Bohemia was actually my first coffee shop customer. I went to them in March of 2016. It was right after I pitched at the 1 Million Cups for the first time. 1 Million Cups is an entrepreneurs networking group that meets once a week. It's a national program with local chapters, and the one here is for Cedar Rapids and Iowa City. So the first time I pitched, it was actually at the Iowa City location. And then through a connection, it was the organizer at the time. Did you know Sarah Binder?
No, I don't think so.
She's she's a journalist now, but at the time she was the organizer for 1 Million Cups.
Okay.
She knew one of the owners at Bohemia, and she tried my coffee. Sarah tried my coffee, said, wow, this is really good. And one thing they ask you at 1 Million Cups is like, how can this community help you? And like when I was giving my pitch, they're like, how can this community help you? I'm like, I need to find a coffee shop customer because I don't have one. Like I'm trying to sell to coffee shops and I haven't made a sale yet. So Sarah liked me, liked my product, believed in the vision that I was pitching for Ross Street Roasting, gave me a contact for one of the owners at Bohemia, and then within a week or so I roasted up some coffee samples and then took them over to the shop there and gave them to them to try. And they really liked it, and I started selling coffee to them in about March or April of 2016. So they became my first coffee shop customer. And then in November of that same year, one of the other owners that I had not met before, he's part owner in Bohemia, but his main job is running a lip care manufacturing company and also in Nubo called Eco Lips, Eco Lips lip balm. So he's the president and founder of Eco Lips, part owner in Bohemia. I hadn't met him. I'd been doing business with Bohemia for 6 months, and he just wanted to meet me and talk business. And he asked me what my plans for the company were for Ross Street Roasting, and I said, well, and so this was November of 2016, so just over a year ago. My daughter, who was in her senior year at the time, had just decided which college she was going to go to, and it was the college in Virginia where I was then working. And so it's a private school, so it's expensive, but the fact that I was working there meant she got a pretty dramatic tuition discount, as long as I continued to work there. So like she's like, all right, I'm going to school here. I'm like, well, I guess I'm working there for another 4 years. With Ross Street, which I was operating on the side, in addition to my, the job that paid the bills was my job with the university. With Ross Street, I was paying myself a little bit, not much. And then on the balance sheet, I was starting to get financially to the point where we were actually going to start making money soon. Like within the next 6 months, we were on track to become a profitable business. And I was going to be able to do it without quitting my other job. And since my daughter just decided that she wanted to go to school there, I was like, all right, I've got 4 more years working for the university. So I was telling Steve this, one of the owners at Bohemia, and I said, okay, so here's my plan. I can't quit my job that's paying the bills right now. I'm almost profitable with Ross Street Roasting. So when I hit profitability, I'm just going to coast because I can't grow the business anymore without spending more time working on the business, probably buying new equipment that I don't have money for right now, et cetera, et cetera. And Steve offered, he said, okay, well, what if we became business partners with you and helped you grow the business, and you could keep your other job? And that sounded really cool, so we negotiated for 3 months is how long it took to take that idea from, the initial idea phase to an actual legal, a legal restructuring of Ross Street Roasting, where we now had not me and my original investors, but me, Bohemia, and my original investors were now part of the owner group. And
that would take a while to figure out everything.
yeah, yep. The fun thing about that whole negotiation process was the company was created as a 50-50 LLC, so I was 50% owner and my investors were 50%. And when Bohemia bought in, they bought out a section of my investors' 50%, and I kept mine. So I made it through that deal, still the majority owner, which I wasn't anticipating keeping all 50% of what I already had. So the fact that I did was really, it felt good. And that was actually my wife's idea, because I was ready to give up some equity, because Bohemia wanted to be closer to me in ownership, and my wife was like, no, you're not, I mean, if you want to do this, like, you're not giving up anything. Like, this is your company, you're running it, you're going to build it. So I'm like, okay. So I tend to be kind of a people pleaser, so I can be a little accommodating. And so I had to like kind of go against my natural inclinations and, you know, go back into the negotiations, and I'm like, nope, I'm not giving up any, you know, and they're like, okay. And, you know, so we made it through the negotiations that way. And yeah, everybody came through it, and it was, and it's been a good relationship. Like, being in business, having Bohemia as a business partner has been really beneficial, because they're a coffee shop and they have now this like business relationship with me as a roaster. Like, we can work together to make sure that I'm doing my job to the best of my ability. Like, they can be a quality control partner, that like they're buying a bunch of my coffee, but I'm like, hey, if this isn't quite right, like, tell me, because this is your product too. So that's been good. This guy Steve, who's the founder and president at Ecolips, part owner of Bohemia, he knows like everybody in town. And so just having a connection as a small town rural business with somebody that's so crazy well connected in a city like Cedar Rapids has been really beneficial for me to be able to grow a business in a small town. Because if I only relied on the local community in a town of 5,000 people, like, I couldn't really do anything. Like, I'd probably still be like on a tiny little roaster. So having a connection with an urban community has helped me grow the business way faster than I probably would have been able to otherwise. So that's the fun part of having business partners like that. It also makes things a little bit more complicated, because the more people you add, you just, you know, managing that stuff becomes a little bit more complicated.
Steve's actually one of our speakers also.
Okay, yeah, so you'll meet
Sometime in
Steve.
April.
Yeah, Steve's a riot.
Yeah.
He'll be a lot more entertaining than I am.
So, what's your goal to hit, your long-term goal for this business?
Yeah, right now my big stretch goal is like, I want to hit $1 million in sales by year 5. And let's see, I count, so this is basically year 3 for us. And we're working on some pretty big stuff right now that could potentially bring another partner into the business, but could also open up a huge sales channel for us. So if that happens, and we're able to hit, you know, to really blow up our sales, I have to expand our facilities this year. I'm maxed out on my roaster. I've got a little 6-pound coffee roaster. So I roasted personally 10,000 pounds of coffee last year on a machine that only does 6 pounds at a time.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and I was only working full-time with the business half of that year. So it was, yeah, so that little machine is maxed out. I need to get a bigger roaster. I can't fit it in my building, so I need to get a bigger building to put the bigger roaster in. So that's about $125,000 puzzle that I'm trying to solve right now. So if we can do that, figure out this deal that might get the new partner in, open up more sales channels. Like if we hit $1 million in 2 years, 2019, in 2020, that's kind of my big goal. So, and I've done some playing with numbers and sales projections and budgets and stuff like that, and it's a big goal, but I don't think it's entirely unrealistic.
Which is how the goal should be.
Yeah, it should make you reach a little bit, and it'd be a reach. Yeah.
So is there anything that you wish that you had done different now that you're kind of into this a little bit?
We started so lean and mean and scrappy, and we still kind of are. If I could have changed anything, I just wish I could have had more money, but that's really, yeah, exactly, like, that's everybody's problem, so, in terms of, there are a couple things, and it's more kind of on the personal side, because like this generated some anxiety in my marriage. Like this is a big risk to introduce into the financial situation of a married couple with a daughter that's going off to college, and so because I tend to be pretty risk tolerant and am pretty passionate and ready to jump into some of those risky ventures, like it probably would have been wiser if I would have been a little bit more cautious in the process of getting into this. It would have been better for my marriage at that point. But my wife and I are still married. We still love each other. But yeah, so it's really tricky to balance that kind of thing with your personal relationships that are heavily impacted by kind of business decisions that you're making.
But as far as the business itself, there's not a lot that you regret
No, I don't. It's
or wish you'd done different. That's probably
yeah.
part of it.
Everything, because I'd never done anything like this before, both on the craft coffee roasting side and on the business startup side,